We are in the Gospel of John, and last week I began by going and looking at the Gospel itself, how John designs it specifically to create faith in people. I mean, he gets to the end of chapter 20 and he says, by the way, these things are written that you might believe, and that by believing you might have life in his name. And what John did was he took 7 miracle stories. He referred to them as signs because he wanted us to see them different. He wanted to see what they were pointing to. And of course, they were pointing to who Jesus was. And so he begins to enumerate these 7 signs of all the miracles that Jesus performed. He said, here are the 7 I'm going to pick out, and I want you to see what they tell you about Jesus in hopes that they would create faith. Today, we're going to move to another aspect of John's gospel. John, if you know anything about John, you know that he is normally called the apostle of love. And there's a reason for that. If you look in John's gospel, the Greek word agape, there's an organization that Churches of Christ sponsor here in Middle Tennessee called Agape. And it helps with child services, with adoption and things like that. And it comes from the Greek word, which means divine love. And it appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke in both a noun and a verb form about 28 times. Okay? 28 times in those 3 Gospels. Look at John. The same word appears in John's Gospel 43 times. In other words, it's almost a third more than all the other 3 combined. Why? Because that's what John's focusing on. He is focusing on the very nature of God. Look at what he called himself in John 13. One of them, this is what Tim was talking about a while ago. They're observing the Lord's Supper. They're in the upper room. And one of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining. They didn't sit in chairs back then. They reclined on little small couches or pillows. And I don't know if any of y'all eat laying on your couch. I do. After my kids left home, I didn't like sitting at the dining room table with June on the other side just staring at me. And so I'll go and I'll lay down on the couch and I'll put a pillow there and I'll lean. And the reason I told June I'm doing that is because Jesus did. Okay? So if any of y'all need authority, just turn to the Bible. John is the one that night who is reclining next to Jesus. Okay? Judas is on the other side. That's why Jesus said, I'm going to take this bread and I'm going to dip it in, and whoever I give it to is the one who's going to betray me. Now, it was too large of a setup for Jesus to give it to hardly anyone else. But John's on one side of him, Judas is on the other, and that's who he gave it to. But notice how John describes himself. I'm the disciple whom Jesus loved. Jesus had 3 disciples that were special to him. Peter, James, John. But of those 3, one stood out. Only one of them was so special that when Jesus hung on the cross, concerned about his mother's care, he looks at John and he says, behold your mother. And he looks at his mother and says, behold your son. And the text says that immediately after Jesus died, John took her and took care of her. That's how close John was to Jesus. He was the best friend of the incarnate God. I want you to think about that. You know, when you turn to the other Gospels, Jesus teaches about love. I mean, you turn to the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. One of the most difficult things as a teenager that I thought about. How in the world can you love your enemies? If you loved them, they wouldn't be your enemies, right? The problem with that is in mixing up different types of love. We have a love called friendship love. I suspect you have people that you love dearly because you've been friends with them for years and years and years and years and years. My roommate in my college outside of June is still probably my best friend in the world. We roomed together in college. We acted like brothers. We oftentimes are confused as being brothers. Our voices are almost identical. Back when we were in college, he would be talking to a girl in the room, need to go and get a Dr. Pepper down at the end of the hall. He would just hand the phone to me. I would talk to his girlfriend, and she would never know that someone different was talking to her. I'm telling you the truth. That's a true story. One time, him and his wife had gotten into a fight. I didn't know it. I couldn't get a hold of him, so I called her. As soon as she answered the phone, her name's Tammy, I said, "Hey, Tammy." She said, "I told you not to call me back." And I said, "Tammy, this is your preacher." And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were my husband." "No, I'm glad I'm not either." It's hard to love enemies if you look at them like they have to be first friends. But that's not what agape love is. Agape love is very different. We'll look at that here in just a moment. You go on to Matthew 22, a Pharisee tests Jesus. "Teacher, which is the greatest of the commandments?" I mean, that was evidently a debate that they had quite often. Of all the commandments, starting with the 10 commandments, which one is most important? How do you pick that? And you say, well, you go with number 1. Jesus didn't go with number 1. Jesus responded to him and he said, "Love the Lord your God." You see, the 10 commandments are found in Deuteronomy 5. The motivation for keeping the 10 commandments is found in Deuteronomy 6, where he begins with, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And you need to love your God. And then he quotes it, "with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind." Jesus said that's the greatest commandment. And then the second is likened to it, going back to the book of Numbers, "Love your neighbor as yourself." But it's John, not Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who makes agape love the absolute signature of what it means to be a Christian. Defines it completely by what happened on the cross at Calvary. If you understand the nature of divine love, you understand what God is calling you to. We get so mixed up with divine love. One Sunday I was preaching, and I'm preaching on love. And by the way, y'all, whether it's divine love or it's family love or it's friendship love, all of them come from God. Okay? And I'd been talking about the importance of not just loving, but telling people that you love them. I grew up in a family that didn't do that. Okay? My parents, we didn't say like, the Waltons did, "Good night," I mean, we had one phrase, which a lot of y'all probably said, "Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the bed bugs bite." There you go. I didn't know what that meant, but that's what we used to say. But anyway, we didn't say "I love you." I never remember my dad saying "I love you." I wanted to hear it so bad I could have died. Never heard it. He died before saying it. And so I went the opposite direction. I told my boys every chance I had, "I love you." June did the same thing. I mean, we emphasized it over and over again. And I began to preach the importance of that. And I had one brother one Sunday catch me in the foyer and just tear into me with everything he had. He said, "You need to quit preaching that junk. That's just a bunch of garbage that liberal people are saying." And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. He said, "You show me one place in the Bible where it says you have to tell people you love them." I said, "Well, I don't know that I can show you a place where it says it, but I can show you a place where God did it to Jesus when he was baptized on the Mount of Transfiguration. If Jesus needed to hear from his Father that he loved him, do you think we're less important than Jesus?" I then made a mistake. I said, "You need to treat your kids like you treat your wife. You tell your wife that you love her, right?" And you know what he said to me? He said, "I hadn't for years." And I said, "You what?" And he said, "I hadn't told her in years that I loved her. I told her when I got married, and if I ever change my mind, I'll tell her." Ladies, how would you like to be married to a man like that? I told him, I said, "You need to repent right now and go tell your wife that you love her." I don't think he ever did. I suspect he died with his wife very seldom hearing the words, "I love you." Y'all, love is the core of who God is. It's a word that refers to agape is to a selfless, unconditional, sacrificial love. I call it divine love. It seeks the highest good of others, regardless of their actions or qualities. It involves commitment and faithfulness and a deliberate act of the will. It's not about emotionally loving someone. It's about willfully doing what's best for them because they were created in God's image just like you are. That's what we love. God is love. You go to John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, talking about Jesus. The Word was with God. The Word was God. And then to make sure that we get the point, he says, and God is love. Jesus is love incarnate. And the more you get to know about Jesus, and the more you observe Jesus, the more you understand what true love is all about. Jesus didn't like everybody he met. I mean, he looked at the Pharisees and it just tore him all to pieces. He was angry with them. But he also loved them so much that he was willing to go to the cross for them. By the way, golden text of the Bible. I don't know about you, but this is one, I think the first verse I ever memorized. And I don't know how old I was, probably 3, 4 years old. I remember going home and telling my parents I've learned a Bible verse. And many of you have also memorized it. By the way, I've got the King James up here. It's kind of like saying the Lord's Prayer. If you're going to say the Lord's Prayer, you got to get it with the King James, okay? I mean, the rest of the versions kind of mess you up. You ever get to the Lord's Prayer and you get down to that part, forgive us of our, and you're trying to go, do I say debtors or do I say trespasses? You know, and you're like, why in the world did we mix that up? I've got a good friend now that says, don't say either one, say sins. Forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. That's the point of the text. But it's hard to say it without the King James. I want us to quote this or read it. If you don't know how to quote it, just read it. And I want you to do it slowly with me. I want you to let it soak in. And so let's quote, read, say it together. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. You can take that verse and literally take every noun in it and every adjective as well. And boy, you want to talk about powerful? 3 things you see in the text. God loved the world. God acted. We didn't act. God acted. It's not something that we deserve. It's not something that we can earn. It is something that God gave to us as unmerited favor. It is the flip side of grace. Love and grace go together like a heads and tails on a coin. And that's what agape is. And so God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. The verse in the Bible that helps me with this phrase more than any other is a passage out of Genesis. And it's a verse where God comes to Abraham. Abraham is now 100 and maybe 11, 12, 113 years old. His son, his promised son, is maybe 11, 12, 13 years old. And he comes to him, and I want you to look how he parses it. He says to Abraham, I want you to take your son. I want you to take your son. Your only son. Now, if you know anything about the story of Abraham, Abraham had Ishmael before he had Isaac, okay? He had another son, but it's not a son of promise. It's not a son through Sarah. It's not the son that God had said they would have. So you take your son, you take your only son, and then, boy, to make sure he understands it, whom you love. And then let's make it harder. Isaac. If you don't know this, Isaac means laughter. And he was named Isaac for 2 reasons. Sarah laughed in disbelief. She's like, will a woman 89 years old really give birth? You got to be kidding me. Abraham laughed for joy because God was finally fulfilling his promise. I mean, take your son, your only son whom you love, your laughter. Whew. And you go to the region of Moriah. By the way, the region of Moriah is where the Temple Mount is in Jerusalem today. He went to the Temple Mount where the temple would eventually be built. You sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain. And if you're not familiar with the story, Abraham does it. Isaac goes with him. They go up to the mountain. He binds up Isaac. He places the wood in place. He's got the fire. He lays Isaac up on the altar. He takes the knife, and he's about to kill his only son. The Hebrew writer said that he had come to the conclusion that since he was the son of promise, if he killed him, God would raise him from the dead. That's faith. But an angel stops him. and there's a ram in a bush nearby, and they sacrificed the ram instead. This story is not so much about Abraham. It is about Abraham and his faith. But it's more about God. And God giving us a picture of just what Jesus would do, as Tim said, on the night he was betrayed, looking forward to what would happen the next day. That's what God did. God did for us what Abraham was about to do, but God stopped him. And so that's what it means to give your only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Going back to that statement, that purpose statement in chapter 20, these things are written that you might believe. It's all about believing who Jesus is, what he did, what happened when he rose from the grave, and where he is right now at the right hand of God, reigning over all of creation. And it's faith in what he did for you at Calvary. Let's look at that a little bit more. Everlasting life is a life defined by love. That's the thing, I think, more than anything else that Jesus wanted us to see. You turn to John 13, and it's the last night. He's in the upper room. He is with his apostles. And look at what John, the apostle of love, says. It was just before the Passover. Literally, the meal was on the table. They were fixing to eat it. Jesus knew that the hour had come. All the way through John's gospel. My hour's not yet. My hour's not yet. My hour's not yet. Now is my hour. He knew it was time. And then notice what it says. To leave this world, to go to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. John is saying something amazing. You turn over 2 chapters and look at what he says. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You know, if you try to describe love in this world, the greatest of love is to lay down your life for your friends, for your loved ones. Most of us in here would do that in a heartbeat. June and I have got 3 grandsons. Someone tried to harm one of them, I would step in front of them in a heartbeat. I'd take a bullet in a second. Someone tried to hurt my 2 sons, my daughter-in-laws, my wife. Most of us would say that. We would gladly give our lives for our friends. Okay. But what about God? It would be Paul who would take this to an eternal level. Not this world level. Eternal level. And notice what he says in Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. This is a higher love. While we were still sinners. You go down to verse 10, 2 verses down, we're God's enemies. Christ died for us. I mean, he didn't die just for his friends. He died for his enemies. He died for Judas, who he knew was fixing to betray him. He died for him. Which is why, when you turn to Luke 23:34, Jesus, as he's hanging on the cross, he says 7 things. Number one in the list is about love. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Now, to understand this and to appreciate this, you got to go back 1 verse. Go back to verse 33. When they came to the place called the skull, they crucified him there. That's what had just happened. They had nailed him to a cross. They had lifted him up. They had shamed him beyond belief. They were leaving him there to die. And what's the first words out of Jesus' mouth? Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. This is a picture of a nail. I had put the whole picture up, and then I decided not to put it up because who might be in here and what it might do to you. Where it's blank in the middle, in the picture, there's an ankle bone. This is the first evidence we ever found of a crucifixion. Found in a tomb outside of Jerusalem about 50 years ago. And I didn't want to be graphic. I know Halloween's coming up and our kids they get into Halloween, but to me, it's not Halloween to talk about someone who dies by crucifixion. This nail was driven through a man's ankle. It also was driven into olive wood. They found on the nail evidence of olive wood. Okay, so it was an olive tree that had been cut for the cross. When they drove the nail in, if you'll look on the end of it, it hit a knot. And when it hit a knot, the end of the nail bent. By the way, you ever tried to take a nail out that the end of the nail's been in the wood? You can't get it out. I mean, you cannot pull it out. They couldn't pull this nail out. So they ended up cutting the man's legs off, cut the cross off, and buried him with his ankle foot still attached to the wood that he had been nailed to. When Jesus said, "Greater love hath no one than to lay down his life," we need to understand what he did. You go back to Isaiah 53, and Isaiah, almost 800 years before this, said, but he was pierced. He was pierced. That nail went through him. Feet, hands, for our transgression. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. By his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. The problem is we don't let this sink in. And I think the reason is because it's talking about all of us. I want you to read this with me again, if you can. But I want you to read it with the pronouns changed. And so if you would, let's read this text together. Let me go back to it. But he was pierced for my transgressions. He was crushed for my iniquities. The punishment that brought me peace was on him, and by his wounds I am healed. I, like sheep, had gone astray. I had turned to my own way, and the Lord has laid on him my iniquity. That's what Jesus did. Don't generalize it so much that it doesn't impact you. I mean, it is for my sins. It is for Les Chapman's sins that Jesus, it is Les Chapman that he's praying, Father, forgive him, because he doesn't know what he's doing. That's the love of Jesus. And so as he's up in the upper room, he turns to his apostles and he says, a new commandment I give you. Love one another. Now you look at that and you go, wait a minute. You've been talking about love all the way through your teaching. How can that be a new commandment? I mean, we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. We're already supposed to love one another. He changes it. He changes it because he changes the standard in it. Notice what he changed it to. As I have loved you. That's a different level. I mean, when Jesus, you read Isaiah 53, and then you listen to Jesus say, now you go out and love one another the way I have loved you. That changes the entire equation. Agape here means sacrificing our comforts, our rights, our time, and sometimes our reputation for the sake of another person. It means choosing the other person's good over our own convenience. Agape love is not natural. It is the hardest thing you'll ever learn how to do because it calls you out to be something that we're not naturally in this world. Can I ask you a question? When was the last time you sacrificed your comforts, your rights, your time, and even your reputation? When was the last time you did that? One of the hardest things I do on a regular basis is I appear in parole hearings. Because of my work at River Bend, a lot of the inmates will come to me and say, I'm coming up for parole. Will you speak on my behalf? And you go into a room and you sit down at a table and you listen to the individual describe their crime. And at River Bend, many of them are murders, multiple murders sometimes. And in that room is family members who are begging the parole board, do not let this person out. They murdered my loved one. I get it. And yet I go in there not as someone representing the government seeking justice. I go in as someone representing God seeking mercy and grace. And y'all, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. How can you ask for someone who took someone's loved one and ask the federal or ask the local government to parole them, put them back in society? And of course, the only thing I have to base on is the fact that they now say that they've come to know God in Jesus and they want another chance. That's the challenge of agape love. To live in a world of where we say, not to just people in prison, but to people everywhere you meet, God's willing to forgive you. He's willing to give you another chance. For Jesus, it meant choosing the other person's good over our own and going to bat for them. You know, when you look at that last night and you just stop for a moment, you go, what did Jesus do that showed his disciples how much they loved him? He did three things that if we're not careful, we read through it so fast, we don't pause long enough to let it hit us. The first thing that he did is that he washed the disciples' feet. I mean, he comes in and the disciples are so arrogant that no one's been willing to wash the other guy's feet as they came in. Now, by the way, washing feet back then were important. How many of y'all, when you were kids, went barefooted in the summer and you'd come in the evening and your mother would say to you, now go to the bathroom and wash your feet? Anybody ever experienced that? Oh, goodness gracious, y'all need to move to Mississippi. Man, we all did that. I mean, you had to wash your feet. Every time you'd come in, Mother would say, go wash your feet. It's time for supper. You washed your feet before you ate. Well, Jesus, they need to do the same thing. They've been walking around in sandals. They've been walking out in streets that sewage ran down. Their feet stunk. And here they are fixing to eat a meal, and their feet are smelling terrible. Jesus comes in, ties a towel around his waist, pours water in the basin, and begins to wash their feet. Peter, of course, objects, and Jesus has to put him in his place. He finishes up, and then he says to them, do you understand what I've done for you? And of course, the answer is, of course they haven't. Jesus goes on to say, I'm your teacher and Lord. You call me that, rightfully so. And now that I, your teacher, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set an example for you that you should do as I've done for you. Now, we don't do foot washing services as a part of our kind of church heritage. I've been involved in some foot washing services where I've had people wash my feet and I've washed people's feet. It's incredibly humbling. But if all you think he's asking you to do is to go through a ritual that illustrates what he's done, you're misunderstanding the whole point. He's talking about literally serving other people when nobody else wants to serve them. Because that's what Jesus has done for us. Why? Why do we wash people's feet, quote unquote? Because of our witness to the world. By this will everyone know that you're my disciples if you love one another. It is what screams out to the world, we are the people of God. Not the style of worship we have, not the songs that we sing. I mean, of all the things that we do that are biblical in nature and appropriate in nature, it is our love that says to the world there's something different about these people. Number two, he promised the disciples that he'd not leave them orphans. I love this. I'll ask the Father, he's going to give you another advocate to help you and to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. We call him the Holy Spirit. You know him, for he lives with you, and he will be in you. When we're baptized, he comes to dwell in us. And I'll not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. What is Jesus saying? He's saying, listen, whether it's me or the Spirit, because I'm in the Spirit and the Spirit's in me, we're going to be with you to the very end. Matthew 28, verse 20. To the very end. I love when someone says to me, I've got your back, and I'll have it to the end. And that's what Jesus said. But my favorite part is he prayed specifically for his disciples. Right before he leaves the room. Right before he goes to Gethsemane. Right before they're going to turn and run and Peter's going to deny him. Jesus prayed for them.